My name is Makosinski, and I beat the often path by staying true to who I am and what I've always loved doing since I was a child. Um, I am 24 years old. I'm from Vancouver Island, BC, Canada, but I currently live in New York City. And I am, I guess, kind of a Renaissance woman. I have many different passions and skills in a variety of topics, which include inventing, writing, film, speaking, etc.
Welcome to Beat the Often Path. I'm Ross Palmer. This is the show where we highlight unusual success stories to help us expand our horizons about what's possible in our lives and in our careers. Do you feel like you made a wrong turn somewhere in your life or in your work? Well, then this is the show for you. I'm joined today by Makosinski, inventor, polymath, person featured on Time Magazine, Forbes, entrepreneur, the Smithsonian, Jimmy Fallon, and more. We'll be talking about living up to the name of child prodigy and also about what it means to be a Renaissance woman in today's hyper-focused society. Why should you give a shit? Our intro has two parts, Anne the inventor and Anne the person. When she was just 15 years old, the inventor Anne invented and patented a flashlight that's powered by the body heat of your hand with a host of wide-ranging implications for countries without reliable access to power. In developing countries around the world, electricity remains a major hurdle. She, quote, initially thought of the idea for a body heat-powered flashlight after learning that a friend in the Philippines who didn't have electricity was failing in school because she didn't have enough time to study during daylight hours. Her friend's dilemma is surprisingly common among a growing number of people in developing regions that either can't afford or don't have access to the power grid. Now, that's something that Tuan Si Nguyen wrote for the Smithsonian Magazine. A high school sophomore did that? Well, I don't know about you, but I, for one, would love to have a chat with this outstanding person and... Oh, we can? She's here again, on the show, right, today? My God, you're a good assistant imaginary person that I talk to off camera, so I feel less alone in my little void. Celestina Radonho writes, between 60 and 70% of business owners in sub-Saharan Africa say that a lack of power is the number one factor stunting their growth. At least they know what's stunting their growth. Being profoundly unlikable is probably what's stunting my growth. The fact is, the candles and kerosene lamps are no longer a substitute in the modern age for good old-fashioned electricity, making our guest today's contribution particularly notable. But she's more than an inventor. She's also a speaker, a writer, an activist, and so much more. So we're going to talk about neuroplasticity and forming connections between things that have no apparent connection, a subject that endlessly fascinates me because, as David Epstein says in his amazing book Range, studies have found that Nobel Prize-winning scientists are about 25 times more likely to sing, dance, or act than the average scientist. They're also 17 times more likely to create visual art, 12 times more likely to write poetry, and 4 times more likely to be musicians. So in your face, straight and narrow path folk, here's Anne Makosinski. You just said a whole lot of stuff. You've done incredible things with your life. You've been featured on all kinds of publications and all of that. But maybe give us a bit of an introduction to kind of how you got started. You said you followed your passion. What was that passion? When did it start?
Well, I have many passions, but
Yes.
I mean, the story that I usually tell is that when I was growing up, my first toy was a box of transistors and other electronic parts. My parents kind of came from very different cultural backgrounds and very different experiences growing up. My dad was born during World War II in Poland, and my mom comes from a very tiny village in the Philippines. So they both kind of grew up not having a lot. And they actually believed, even though we were living in Canada and more well off than they were growing up, when I was growing up, they were like, if we give Anne less to play with, she will be more creative with whatever she does have. And that will perhaps induce a more creative childhood and mindset going into her adult life. So anyways, my first toy was a box of transistors. From there, I had a hot glue gun, and I would collect garbage from around the house and piece together my very first inventions, which of course never worked. But the idea of taking the resources around me and piecing them together to make something that could improve my situation or solve a problem kind of just came out of necessity. I was also raised on operas and classical music, and I became obsessed with opera. I still am. But also my first film was in 1939. I want to say 38, but I'm pretty sure it's 1939 film, Alexander Nevsky by Eisenstein. So I just had a very different kind of like art side to myself as well as a science side. I was watching a lot of silent films by Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd. So I was very out of date. None of my classmates knew anybody that I talked about most of the time.
So you're like a liberal arts professor's child's dream, basically. Sergei Eisenstein to start, and Charlie
Yeah.
Chaplin, huge fan of Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. Obviously, comedy a big part of my life, all those classics. So you had a very well-rounded childhood with a focus on a lot of artsy, intellectual things.
I
That's
guess, yeah.
fascinating.
I was just kind of a very creative childhood, I guess, both in the arts side of my passions and also sciences. I was always like taking old computers apart, whatever I could find, starting to invent things that again never worked. But it was just a very creative childhood, and I feel really lucky to have been given that space to do things like that.
Yeah, that's truly remarkable. And what was the first breakthrough invention? I know, but we'll tell our. What was the
So
first practical invention that you made?
I was doing a lot of different science fairs. I did 10 science fairs from grade 6 to grade 12. So every year I made a different invention in the area of alternative energy harvesting, which is harvesting energy that's always around us, but we don't necessarily take advantage of regularly all the time just yet. So I was making a lot of inventions. And then in my grade 10/grade 11 year, I had made this flashlight for my friend in the Philippines who had failed her grade in school because she couldn't afford electricity. So she had no light to study with at night. So I made a flashlight that runs off the heat of the human hand for her to solve her problem. And that was my science fair project that year. I applied for the Google Science Fair and won my age category there. And this very embarrassing video of me explaining my flashlight for my Google Science Fair application went viral. And things kind of changed for me, I think, at that point, which was the start of my grade 11 year in high school.
Mm-hmm. So your friend, I mean, we tend to get so caught up in the issues that bother us, like how many followers do we have, how much money do we have, all of these things. How did you become aware that your friend didn't have access to electricity?
Well, I'm half Filipino, so
Yeah.
I visited my mom's village a few times in the Philippines growing up and had made some friends. And back in the day, there was something called Yahoo Messenger. I'm not sure if it still exists or not, but I would keep in touch with a few of them on there. And they would go to internet cafes where you like pay money to like use a computer and have internet. So she wrote to me one day through that and told me her situation. And it really surprised me because, I was growing up on Vancouver Island where we took flicking on the light switch and, things that seem very basic, we took it for granted. So I think at my young age to learn that a girl that was just like me, but in a different part of the world didn't have something as simple as light really shocked me. And I wanted to do something about that.
So did you always have the idea that you would bring these inventions to the world? Was that something that you considered early on?
Not
or was
at all.
it just a byproduct?
Not at all.
Okay.
I just made science fair projects and I did not talk about them to most of my friends. I was embarrassed to be considered a quote unquote nerd or science geek because I already looked the part at that age. And I was never considering that at all. And I was so surprised when people got so excited about my invention. I truly got very lucky because there are so many other much more brighter, much more intelligent science fair kids that made really cool inventions and technology and contraptions. But I think it was a dose of luck where I was just at the right place at the right time. And I think being able to communicate my ideas efficiently, and it was a very simple invention as well, so many people could understand it, really helped my project at that time take off.
Mm-hmm. And are these science fairs, is this like a Canadian thing? Because when I grew up, we had science fairs, but it was like once a year, not much focus put on it.
Yes, so they're
very
once a year.
pathetic showings. Okay.
Science fairs happen all around the world. So I would do my local science fair, which was the Vancouver Island Regional Science Fair. Then I qualified a couple times and I went to the Canada-wide Science Fair. So everyone around Canada would go to that. Then there was something called the International Intel Science and Engineering Fair, which now is a new name because I think they have a new sponsor. And that's a worldwide science fair. So there would be over 1,000 projects. I don't remember the exact number from all around the world that will come and who have qualified to get to the science fair. And to qualify for the Intel Science Fair, if you were American, it was a little more complicated because there's so many different states. So they would have their own state fairs and then the top people and would compete and da-da-da. But for Canada, if you had gone to the Canada-wide Science Fair, you would apply to go again to the Intel and hope you would get in. And then the Google Science Fair was another worldwide slightly more virtual science fair at first because everyone could apply online. It didn't matter what your background was. And then you got selected as one of the 90 regional finalists. And then the top 15 were selected to go to Mountain View to Google's headquarters and compete there.
Whoa. So that's huge. Big deal. And were you emboldened by the prior success to do something like Google? Whose idea was that to submit it there?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I think it was either a science teacher or a photographer that I knew at my high school that had like mentioned that like they had heard about this Google Science Fair happening and that I should apply because I had like recently won at the Canada-wide Science Fair and my school had heard about it. So I just, as a good high school student, I completely forgot that to apply until the night of the deadline.
Right.
So when I applied, I either had the option of submitting a video explaining my project or a PowerPoint. And I was like, I don't have any time for a PowerPoint. So I just like submitted this video and my written report from previous science fairs and then got selected. Yeah.
That's incredible. And in 2013, you ended up winning the Google Science Fair.
Mm-hmm.
How did that change your life? What was the consequence of that?
Winning the Google Science Fair taught me that anything is possible if you put your mind to it and are dedicated and work really hard. It also kind of gave me this boost to kind of take off and do what I wanted with the success or whatever you want to call it from winning the fair. And that kind of has led to where I am currently in life. So I am really thankful for what the Google Science Fair was able to give me. And that at that time, I was able to take all these opportunities and be able to step up to the plate and do them because there was no media training, which should have been part of the thing. Once you want the fair and like, you know, I was getting my parents, my school was getting all these requests for interviews and everything. And because I had taken a bunch of speech lessons and I loved speech competitions and science fair was a big training point of being able to eloquate and explain yourself properly. I was able to kind of step up and be that quote unquote child genius that the news outlets loved, but it never really felt like an accurate depiction of who exactly I was.
Why do you think it was not accurate?
Because I never saw myself as someone who was really good at science or a genius. I think all my parents and all my friends would laugh if you said that to them. I think I'm just a really creative person who had an idea and followed through and made it. And in today's society, that's really rare, I think, to find, because I think we all have really great ideas, but it's one thing to like be with your friends and be like, oh, wouldn't it be so cool if this existed? But then it's another thing to follow through and actually try to make it. So, it only felt like whenever I got interviewed, I'd be asked this amount of questions out of like the whole circle of who I was. So all everyone saw or what the media chose to see and ask about was the science side of me when I'd always had such a big passion in film. And it's really funny because there was like a film project floating around that didn't take off. Yeah. But in grade 12, this woman that was working for this director came to my school. She followed me around for a week and she interviewed all my friends, my best friends, and all my teachers. And I never got to see what they said to her, but I recently got my hands on the interviews and all of them had said that they thought I was going to go into film or directing. And they were all very surprised by my science fair success because like nobody really knew about it.
Look, Ma, I invented something because I'm curious and intelligent. Wonderful, you're an inventor, our little inventor, always inventing things. Inventor boy, we shall call you.
Flash forward 15 years. Hey, Ma, I like classical music and the magic of cinema. Let me tell you about the Kuleshov effect. It's really...
Not now, honey. Eat this bowl of soup. Besides, you're not a musician or a filmmaker. You're an inventor, silly. You did something once when you were 15 years old, and now it will define you for the rest of your life. Now eat up.
But, Ma...
Hush now, my little inventor. Once you've done something once, that's all you'll ever be.
So do you still see that, you said inventing will still be a part of your life. How do you go about that? Are you going to have a studio? Do you have a studio? Do you have like a workshop where you have parts and you put things together?
Oh gosh. I mean, I have a workplace that I've always had at home in our basement that I really love. In New York, I live in a studio. It's very limited space. Again, with COVID, I didn't want to rent out a space anyways. For the past 2 years, well, it's already October. Okay, so 2 years ago, from 2019, from early 2018 to late 2020, I'd been working on a line of children's toys that run off of green energy.
I saw that. It's awesome.
Then I had to stop all of that,
Oh,
unfortunately, due to some
okay.
scenarios. So I cannot use any of those designs anymore. And I figured that out basically this January. So I kind of had to restart everything, which is why I've decided to focus more on my book and my TV show instead and take a little break. But I hope in this coming new year in 2022, I'll be able to pick up. I hope in this coming year in 2022, I'll be able to pick up where I left off and create a different set of children's toys or something that use my patented flashlights technology. But yeah, the past 2 years, I made this whole line of children's toys. It was really fun. It was an amazing learning experience for me. And to be able to invent again alongside a couple other girls was really cool. But I made some bad business decisions, and that is completely on me. But I'm glad I made those big mistakes then when I was young, so I know exactly what not to do in my coming years. I've always been quite disillusioned from the business world, but I think I always also went in with a pessimistic mindset that nothing would work out, and then nothing ever has. But again, I've had no experience in it like prior to the Google Science Fair and like all of that. So a lot of people, which is understandable in the business world, want to take advantage of younger entrepreneurs or people who don't necessarily know a lot about what's going on and just want to make stuff and are excited about that part instead of the business part. And now I realize that I have to be much more interested and invested in the business part to make sure that what's going on is fair. So it was a big learning experience, but so yeah, I've had to take a break, but I'm excited to start again in 2022.
And some of the things that I'm excited about in the future are the kind of things that will take a person like you out of those scenarios where you're relying on somebody else in a business situation. I think a lot of NFTs in that world is total crap. I think most of them will just go down in value over the years, especially like, oh, I've got a little ape avatar in my Twitter bio. Is that really going to be worth 200 grand in 100? I don't believe it, but maybe I'm wrong. But the cool part of all that is that somebody like you has a chance now to connect directly with an audience, to connect directly with people who might want to buy your stuff in a way that doesn't require permission or authority or somebody else as a middle person between you and the ultimate person that you're selling something to. Do you feel the same way, that part of your plan is to go direct to your fans or whoever's watching?
Yeah, it's just hard because the amount of fans you have does not necessarily translate into the amount of sales. It's usually a much more minute number of the people that actually follow you that will invest in whatever you're offering them as a product. So it's definitely, I think though, like if you have millions of followers, that's why like influencers today it's just insane. Or like we're seeing now with TikTok stars, it's like crazy how fast their careers have just taken off due to followers. Because followers mean money. And it's a crazy concept. And it's really interesting to see what society is putting most value on, people-wise or job-wise.
Yes.
And some would argue it's unfair. I'm sure that people who are not in that place would argue it's unfair. And people who are in that place would be like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can't believe I'm making this much amount of money. So it's definitely a difficult concept to discuss, but yes, I do believe obviously like reaching out to people who follow me and asking them to fund, a Kickstarter or whatever it is would be great. But for example, to do a Kickstarter is a lot of work because yes, you get the money, but then you have to do literally everything else or hire a company and they do part of it and you do part of it. Like it's quite a lot of work to launch a product from an idea that you have in your head. And it takes an immense amount of time and dedication and skill, unless you like are just coming in as a celebrity to endorse a product or like you have an idea and you already have like all the resources at your fingertips. It's a lot different. I'm not saying it's less difficult, but it's a lot different to be like Kylie Jenner and be like, I want to launch a makeup line versus someone who's like a girl in science and being like, I have a product and I am not this wealthy. Let me try and launch something, you know?
You don't want to make something that just buys into that. Like, oh, look, here's new beauty products just for you, right? Here's a new line of
everyone
mascara.
has different passions and whatever, but it's, again, also getting a product that has electronics in it is a lot more pricey and can add a lot more complications when you're trying to get something on the market. So, and I personally, yes, I want to get some sort of product on the market or my flashlights, but I don't want to spend my whole life doing that. And I think that's maybe why also I could have taken it off. I could have taken off further or faster with that if I had dropped out of school and done the whole startup and being an entrepreneur and lived in Silicon Valley. But again, I don't think that's true to who I am and what I want to do. And I still want to be able to pursue my passions in the arts and film. So maybe it's finding a partner who can take over a lot of it for me. Or I always believe that licensing my ideas out would make the most sense.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I should put you in touch with one of my other guests, Ben Stern of Nobo. He's navigated
I know him.
those waters.
He's like my fetus younger brother. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I thought he maybe, because I saw he was your guest and I was like, well, maybe he told you about me. And that's why I'm invited. But yeah, I've known Ben since 2016. I think we met at this like entrepreneurial conference when both he and I were both like tiny children. But it was, I've known him for years. He's the sweetest and he's doing really cool stuff. And he's hilarious. Yeah.
Running down the clock here a little bit, but if you did bring your flashlight out, who do you think needs it most? Is it mostly something that you see benefiting developing countries without power grids?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I'd love to put it in emergency kits because there's no batteries inside them. They can, so they'll sit for years because when batteries sit, corrosion happens, et cetera. It's not good for the environment. So they can sit for years in these kits. And then when you needed a small amount of light in emergency settings, that could be the place. My flashlights are not comparable to battery run flashlights in brightness just because the technology I use, which is called Peltier tiles, otherwise known as thermoelectric generators, they're less than 10% efficient. Now they're getting up to 15, 20, which is great. But usually the most cheapest tiles you could buy, which is what we would use, are less than 10% efficient in harvesting and converting this electricity into, it's converting this temperature differential into energy. So definitely in emergency kits or as reading lights, which makes sense because that's what I designed it for anyways in the first place. It was never something that I feel like, at least for the next few years, is feasible to be like, oh, I'm going camping. Let me see 6 feet in front of me with my handheld flashlight because it's just not that bright. Maybe if I added a battery in it or solar cell or something. But then again, like all solar cell flashlights usually have batteries inside of them or else they wouldn't work when it's dark. And I don't think people like understand, like they're still not that environmentally friendly if something has a battery inside of it. So it's kind of looking how to combat that. So that's why when I designed this line of children's toys, it made a lot of sense to me because like, for example, I made a toy where like the eyes would light up when you put your hand on the toy. So therefore it doesn't need to be a useful amount of light, but it is kind of this magical property for kids. It seems very exciting. And that made way more sense. So that's why I also feel for like next year when I start working on the toys again, doing something in the children's space. And also because so many kids have been inspired by the flashlight story, that makes a lot more sense at first. Yeah.
Well, you have at least one more fan for what it's worth in your corner. I think what you've been up to is really cool. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. I really enjoyed learning about your story. I'm in awe of what you've been able to do and who you are as a person. I had no idea when I first set this up. So it's been awesome to do that. So thank you for one thing, and keep on going. You'll get there. I have no doubt in my mind. It's all going to work out swimmingly. And when you do move out here, just let me know. When you eventually get your place in California, let me know. One last thing, anybody who has ideas, like you said, so many people talk with their friends and they have ideas. I'm guilty of that in the extreme. People who have ideas, what advice do you have for somebody young or old who needs to make that leap?
The advice I would have would be, don't be afraid to ask other people for help because they'll often see a younger version of themselves in you, and you never know what you can get until you ask. So just ask people for what you need or what you want. Don't give up, even if it sucks, but make sure that you're 110% invested and you're not doing it just because of monetary reasons or whatever. Like make sure it's something you're really interested in, because whatever idea you'll probably be stuck with it for a very long time. So make sure you're really passionate about it. And I think the most important thing that kind of runs through my life and has since I was a kid is how precious time is. So be prepared, especially if you have an idea that you want to bring to market, that you'll have to make a lot of sacrifices along the way, whether it be with going to events or social stuff or whatever that might be, in order to clear the time in your schedule to really work on this thing that you love. But hopefully it will pay off.
Well, I can think of no better way to wrap up this episode. Again, thank you. And with that, the official podcast is over.
Man, I enjoyed our chat there, and I'm just thrilled and honored that she was able to join me on this podcast. So if you've enjoyed this show or any of the shows, you know what you can do. Again, it's Christmas spirit, Christmas season, so it's time to donate a little to this show, and all you can do is rate it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. That's right, 5 stars, ladies and gentlemen, on Apple Podcasts. And you can also take the time to leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts. You can also take the time to subscribe on YouTube. Do whatever you can. Share this episode. Share the show in general with anybody. And then you'll make this little Christmas boy oh so happy. Thank you for listening to or watching the Beat the Often Path podcast. I'm your host, Ross Palmer, and I will see you next Friday.